Once the world catches on to just how easy and amazing this rustic Roman pizza recipe is, those old viral videos will be a thing of the past. And I mean, this is super easy. Anybody can make it in any home kitchen. So as I mentioned earlier, no viral hacks, no expensive ingredients, no fancy processes, just some simple ingredients, 2 hands, and just the fortitude to wait a couple nights to get the best pizza eating experience you're ever going to have. And did I mention there's a special sauce involved? This is a very special pizza for a very special occasion. 500 subscribers, guys, that is crazy. I can't believe we're already here, but more on that later. So here's how it's gonna go. We cook, we eat, we celebrate, and we set a new goal. So before we can start cooking, let's take a trip back to the past. 2 nights ago, where all this started. And the first thing you're going to need is an inexpensive kitchen scale like the one I have here. Look, I hate the metric system as much as the next guy, but it's the only way to ensure perfect results. And instead of using the high protein all-purpose flours most influencers want you to use, we're substituting with bread flour. It does the exact same thing while being inexpensive and easily accessible. And the first thing in is going to be 500 grams of our bread flour. Then we're going to very carefully measure out 3 grams of instant or rapid rise yeast, and I mean just barely 3 grams. Since this is going for a 48-hour fermentation, this amount of yeast is perfect, but if you want to do a more traditional 72-hour fermentation, you're going to need to reduce the yeast. Then we're going to hit it up with 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, then combine all of our dry ingredients together, and then this next step is super important. We're going to start slowly adding in 400 milliliters of ice cold water. This water has to be between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This is going to slow down the fermentation process, and it's also going to help form those flaky layers and open crumb structure you expect when eating Roman pie. And after we've used all that water, we're going to hit this thing up with 1.5 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and then we're going to continue rolling this bad boy out until we have something of a rough dough ball like we have here. Then we're just going to go ahead and start kneading this thing out, and let me warn you, this dough is actually really tacky. And before we start rolling out any bench flour, we're going to go ahead and start giving the dough some gentle folds as is to start some gluten development. This is a very high hydration dough, so we're going very gentle with the flour because we do not want this thing to dry out. This dough is roughly 80% hydration. And we're adding just enough flour in between folds to get the dough to where it's no longer sticking to our hands while we're working it. And once we have a less tacky ball, we're going to go ahead and start rolling this thing out and sealing its corners and forming it into a much tighter ball. Don't worry if the skin's not completely smooth, that's going to come later. And once your dough looks like this, we're going to put it back into its original bowl, cover it with a damp kitchen cloth, and let it rest for 30 minutes. And then we're going to pull the curtain off of our dough and start a series of slap and folds, grabbing from the middle of the dough and slinging it over the top. This is going to help stretch things out, and we're going for about 12 good pulls. And after we're done with all of that, we're going to cover this bad boy up and let it rest for another 30 minutes. And we're going to repeat this process 2 more times, resting 30 minutes in between each. And after our final rest, this is what our dough looks like. Look at that smooth, silky, jiggly dough. And those 30-minute rests allow the glutens in the dough to relax just enough to make things easy to work with. So all we're going to do now is roll this bad boy up into a perfect little ball and take a look at this dough. Look at how it jiggles. It's so high hydration. This is honestly the best looking dough I've ever made. So all we're going to do now is very generously grease up the inside of an airtight container, drop in our bouncing bundle of joy, then brush a little extra virgin olive oil on top to prevent anything from drying out. And then we're going to put a lid on this bad boy and set it in the fridge for 24 hours to rest. And after a full 24 hours of refrigeration, you can clearly see our boy got swole. And all we're going to do from here is dump our dough directly onto an unfloured work surface, and then we're going to start degassing this guy by poking some nice dimples into it. This is identical to how you would work a focaccia bread. And once our dough has started warming up, we're simply going to start hanging our dough and letting gravity stretch it out, and then we're going to start forming a rough square that's ideally anywhere in the ballpark of 12 to 15 inches wide. And once we have our rough square formed, we're going to start laminating, folding one side over completely in half, sealing our edges before folding it in half again, making sure we seal our edges, and then yes, 1 fold per each side, so you kind of have like a towel stacked dough ball. And And now we're going to go ahead and start working it back in. Now once you laminate it, it's a bit difficult for it to go back into its original shape. And don't worry if the corners and seams of your ball don't come back together all the way. All that we're trying to do is mold it back into a rough ball, something like you see here. After we re-oil our container, we're simply going to plop down our buoyant ball of dough, rub in another layer of extra virgin olive oil on the top, and you guessed it, we're going to toss it in the fridge and forget about it for another 24 hours. Now that we're all caught up and ready to cook this thing, we're going to pull the dough out of the refrigerator about an hour before we need it and let it sit at room temperature with the lid on. And after it's been out for about 30 minutes, we're going to start working on the best pizza sauce ever. So all we've done here is just add one shredded large sweet onion to a nice hot skillet over medium-high heat. Give it a couple dashes of good kosher salt to help it break down, and then we're going to let these cook down, reducing our heat gradually for about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, we do have some caramelization, as you can see, and we're just going to add in 2 cloves of freshly minced garlic and about 1/4 teaspoon of red chili flakes, and we want to toast that off for about 45 seconds or until it becomes fragrant. Then we are going to hit this bad boy up with a 28-ounce can of freshly hand-crushed San Marzano tomatoes. Then we're going to thin this whole operation out with 2/3 cup of water, getting that nice and combined. Then we're going to bring this sauce to a nice gentle simmer, and when that happens, we're going to drop in 2 teaspoons of dried oregano for a little how you doing, where you been. Get that combined, reduce the heat to medium, and let it simmer for 25 minutes, stirring every 5. I know this looks just like a lot of my other marinara sauces, but it turns out so much better in the end. Have a little faith in your boy, you'll see. As our sauce has been simmering away, our dough is finally ready to be worked, so we're going to plop this bad boy down onto a baking sheet that has been generously greased with some extra virgin olive oil. Also, this is the time where you should set your ovens to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we're going to spritz our hands up with a little extra virgin olive oil, and then we're going to start dimpling and stretching this with our hands. This again is just like focaccia bread. We've made focaccia before on this channel, but don't worry about that video. It wasn't incredibly popular. So as you can see, not only am I dimpling, I'm using my hands to spread it out. Don't be worried if your dough does not go corner to corner on this pan. Keep in mind it's still very cold and the glutens aren't relaxed yet. So we're going to give it a break for about 15 minutes and then come right back to it. And as you can see, this is just going very gently with my hands. And this is kind of where I told you at the beginning of the year where I think the Detroit style pizza comes from. We're going through the exact same processes. Now that that's all been spread out, we're going to take a turn back to our sauce, which should be ready to roll. And this is where things get crazy. After the sauce has been simmering for 25 minutes, we're going to transfer it into this high-sided mixing bowl, and then we're going to process this with our immersion blender, making sure we pass over any large chunks of tomato pulp or unevenly shredded pieces of onion until we have something that looks like this. This is silky, smooth, and luxurious. Now that you guys see what this looks like, we're going to go ahead and season this up with a nice strong pinch of kosher salt to taste, and then some generous grinds of freshly cracked black pepper. And after we fold all of that into our silky sauce, we're going to toss in 1 teaspoon of dried oregano. And I know what you guys are saying, dude, that is a lot of oregano, but once you process the stuff that's inside the sauce, it starts to lose its flavor. And to tie everything in, we're going to drop in 6 to 8 leaves of freshly chopped basil and fold that in. And all that's left to do now, guys, is to give it a taste. And this is the most amazing pizza sauce I've ever made. I started speaking like an Italian mobster afterwards. Okay, disregard that. It's absolutely fire. And by putting these herbs in last, it gives it time to steep and fully penetrate the sauce. Now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and toss our fully worked pizza crust into the oven for about 15 minutes. Guys, it's almost like Christmas Day opening this oven, so let's take a look at what we have here. Traditionally, this is what is called a Roman pizza bianca, or white pizza. So all we're going to do now is let this cool in the pan for about 2 minutes, and then we are going to very, very carefully transfer this over to a cooling rack. This needs to come down in temperature completely, so about 20 minutes. We can't put this back in the oven while the crust is still hot. And guys, the amount of flavor that's in this bad boy is absolutely insane. A lot of people in Italy actually make sandwiches with this bread, and I can understand that. So after 20 minutes, this is what we have here. and take a look at the cook up on the bottom of this crust. If we had put this back into the oven as is while it was hot, that crust would turn a nice golden black. And I have worked too hard to ruin a crust like that. So we're going to add a little additional extra virgin olive oil to the bottom of our baking pan to prevent anything from burning and also to cool it down a little bit more. It's not hot, but I want this to be as cool as it can be. And then we're going to put this pizza back on top of that baking sheet, and now we must assemble the beast. And the first thing on are going to be some very generous ladles of that beautiful pizza sauce, making sure we cover all of those hills and valleys end to end with it, making sure we go back over any thin or bald spots and covering it completely. And your end result should look something like this, vibrant and saucy and beautiful. And for the best Roman pizza, we're going to start layering in a nice dose of some freshly shredded Pecorino Romano cheese. And then we're going to put on enough freshly shredded mozzarella cheese to constipate the entire country of Italy. For those of you that are actually trying to keep track of this recipe, that is a single 16-ounce block of mozzarella cheese freshly shredded. And speaking of recipe, the recipe for all of this will be in the description so you can try your hand at it tonight. And after we're done snowing our beautiful Pinza Romana, we're going to go ahead and start adding on our pepperonis, leaving about an inch of space between each one. And we're going to do about 3 rows of these. You'll see why in a second. Then we're going to go on with some freshly rolled Italian sausage balls. This is mild Italian sausage, and I made these from the kind that are in the casings because the meat is just so much better. And after we have decorated in between the gaps with our beautifully rolled sausage balls, we're going to dust the top with a generous coating of freshly grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And then as a final chef's kiss, another blanket of that beautiful Pecorino Romano. And then we're going to center our monster pizza in the middle of the pan, making sure none of the edges touch the sides of it. And then we're going to toss it into the oven, still at 500 degrees for another 20 minutes. And guys, I pulled mine about 2 minutes early because I saw the crust was getting a little bit too dark on the sides, but I wanted to keep it in long enough for the sausage to cook properly. So I pulled mine around 18 minutes. And guys, would you take a look at that? That is probably the sexiest pizza I have ever made in my life. It's a long process, but totally worth it. So now we're going to go ahead and very, very carefully remove this from the hot pan again onto a cooling rack. We can't keep this on for any longer because we don't want the bottom of that crust to burn. And then after we have it fully nestled and seated on top of that beautiful cooling rack, we're going to go ahead and start layering on a few leaves of fresh basil to add some brightness and herbaceousness. And then a quick drizzle, a light drizzle of extra virgin olive oil just for some flavor. And then we're going to let this cool down for about 5 minutes. And then we're going to start cutting this into some nice sized pieces. And guys, I can't help but be beside myself because I have made this about 3 or 4 times practicing for this video, and this is absolutely the most perfect pizza I've ever made in my life. And guys, take a look at the cheese. Look at the crust. Everything turned out better than I could have hoped for. So let's go ahead and cut to the chase and get to eating. It's been a long journey, my friends, but we have reached the end. And there's only one thing left to do, and that's to take a bite. And I think this piece has been calling my name. And God, look at that. That is just a cheesy, meaty bomb. I'm not saying this because it's on air, but this is the absolute best version of this pizza I've ever made. Hold on. Alright, so the sausage is perfectly cooked, and look, well done undercarriage, perfectly cooked sausage, all the flavors make sense, we still have good crisp. Open pores on the grains here. On the air pockets. This is indeed a mad pizza party. And guys, the reason for the occasion was super special. We hit 500 subscribers. And 2025 isn't even over yet. And you want to know something crazy? My only goal for this year, as far as subscriber count and growth, my end goal for 2025 was to reach 500 subscribers by the end of December. Guys, we are at the end of September and we're already there. So that means we have all of October, November, and December to get this family growing and to reach new heights. And it's all because of you. I love all of you. Thank you for the growth, the support. All the new people that are here, y'all are just as important as the OGs. I love to hear from each and every one of you. Every time we do a subscriber special, we reach another goal. We set another goal. So our next goal, our next special video will be at 1,000 subscribers. And unlike this time, next time you are the boss. So what are some things you want me to make? Let's get to 1,000 subscribers and I will make a viewer requested recipe, whichever gets the most votes. So start commenting now. And guys, let's get to 1K. We can do it, guys. This year has been absolutely nuts. More great stuff coming soon. And again, as always, I love you. I thank you. Let's keep this thing going.